Folks, Michael Ayala here. Thank you so much for subscribing to Legal View. Truly appreciate it. I so much enjoy bringing you this information. And this week was a very interesting week. One of the things I think I learned from this week was that we must stay diligent in this fight for justice and truth. So much out there with the media, so much out there in the law that is being misrepresented, or there's games being played. So from a journalistic point of view, as well as a legal point of view, I just tried to bring some sense of truth to you. So I put together this week in review of the different stories that we covered this week. You can get a chance to see what we're doing here. If you haven't had a chance to catch up on it all week, if something seems interesting to you, jump back to the show, check it out. But in the transcript, as the lawyers went back and forth about details of Anthony's intended testimony on June 8th, Howard said that he believed, this is Michael Howard, both sides were acting in good faith, despite having different understandings of the agreement. He said, I agreed that the deal, for lack of a better term, has held, he said. According to the transcript, I believe both parties have abided by it. The deal has not changed. So this is the part where he's saying, that they didn't breach the deal by saying Carmelo Anthony couldn't testify. That is not what this says at all. And the writer of this should see that. And she should have reported it as such, or at least had a point of view that reported it as such. What he's saying is, up to the point where it became an issue whether Carmelo Anthony would testify, the prosecutors had upheld their part of the deal. They didn't bring in the other information that they said they were going to bring in about the background of Carmelo Anthony. The defense had upheld their side of the deal. They hadn't cross-examined vigorously the witnesses that took the stand. They didn't ask questions about the background and history of Austin Metcalf or his brother. The state didn't put the brother on the stand to talk about the brother. None of those things. So up to that point, both parties had upheld the deal. The problem came when the defense said, we're going to put Carmelo Anthony on the stand. And what he says, we upheld it in good faith, both sides did, despite having different understandings of the agreement. He's saying they upheld their side, but we understood the deal differently. They thought it meant Carmelo couldn't testify. A deal that was supposed to be just about what happened under the tent was suddenly denying the one person who was under the tent, whose story was most important, the opportunity to decide, to talk about what happened under the tent. But okay, Mike Howard said, look, I believe they were acting in good faith when they believed that that's the deal they made, but we believe something different. Not that the deal was different, right? And he had to parse his words. I agree that the deal, for lack of a better term, I didn't even know what to call it. He said, according to the transcript, I believe both parties have abided by it. The deal has not changed in terms of what they were and weren't supposed to do, but that one fact was an issue. There was a different understanding of the agreement. So the agreement itself hadn't changed. There hadn't been specific changes, but what they understood about that deal had changed. So there were a set of agreements. They thought it meant one thing. They thought it meant another, but the actual agreement hadn't changed. So that's the understanding I have of that. And I think it's clearly a different understanding than what they're trying to put out there. Taylor Swift, for instance, she's recently applied for sound marks. Now, this isn't copyright. This is trying to trademark specific timbre and character of her voice. If she's successful, it'll provide her with a very powerful alternative route against any AI impersonators. Now, that is truly landmark if that happens. Trademark is legally defined as any word, name, or symbol or device used to designate or distinguish its source, like my logo, for instance. And that isn't going to all depend on whether the courts are going to be willing to extend that trademark definition to protect human characteristics, because right now it doesn't protect human characteristics. But I think there's a strong argument to be made that artists like Drake, The Weeknd, Taylor Swift, what makes them special, I think they should be able to trademark. It is what distinguishes them. Their industry is music. The music they make, the way they, rhyme, the way they sing, the way they perform is what makes them and separates them from others. I think there's a strong legal argument for it. We'll have to wait and see. Under the law in Mississippi, I found out, if investigators cannot rule out foul play, the case must be classified as suspicious. So either two things are true. Like you said, they're giving too much validity to the statements being given to them by the boys to say that nothing suspicious happened, or the nature of the body that they found may have given them a clue that this was actually a drowning. They seem to be operating under this assumption that this was not a suspicious death, whereas unless they have something solid that says it's not, they have to act like it's suspicious. And I'll tell you what happens when they classify it. You mentioned it changes things. It does. Number one, without that official designation, normally if it's classified suspicious, the state ME investigative office gets involved. Okay. So that's a whole nother level of investigation that gets involved. Without that, they're not involved. It stays local. They keep control over it. The autopsy has to be ordered. Normally, if, like, let's say it's someone who dies of old age, it's not absolutely necessary. You can request it, but not absolutely necessary. They have to do a toxicology report when it's suspicious. They don't have to, but they are doing one in this case. So there's that. The evidence has to begin to be collected as if it is a crime. I'm not sure that's happening under these circumstances. That has not been verified. It is certainly not the way it looks right now. It also has to be classified as suspicious to go out and get warrants, because without that suspicion, you're not going to get the probable cause to get the warrants to search phones and things of that nature. The other thing that has to happen when it's suspicious is once you get all the information in, it has to then be referred to a grand jury. That is going to happen in this case. DA talks about, we're going to present whatever evidence comes out of the investigation to the grand jury. First of all, grand juries are a sham. You can make whatever outcome you want based on it because it's a one-sided, secret proceeding. So you can make it the outcome any way you want. I think Morgenthaler in New York said many, many years ago, you can indict a ham sandwich if you wanted to. Indeed. Well, the opposite is true as well. You cannot indict it if that's not what you want to happen. And the evidence presented to the grand jury is only as good as that's going to be collected. So again, if they haven't classified it as suspicious, if they're not vigorously investigating it as a crime, how good is that and how voluminous is that evidence going to be anyway?
You know what? It could be just, okay, we're going to present it to the grand jury because we don't want them to not think that we are taking this seriously. We're going to leave it into the hands of these individuals on the grand jury. Their identities are secret. It's a secret proceeding. Nobody else is presenting the case except for the prosecution.
So he's let go, and actually the case goes cold. The investigation apparently was bundled a little bit by the local authorities. Eventually, the state authorities get involved. They jump in, start investigating. And almost immediately in 2025, when they get involved, they arrest Derek Bixley. And he's charged with the murder of his girlfriend, Brittany Bauman. Now, what happens next is just incredible. He's charged with murder. He's facing between 50 and 65 years on that murder charge.
Yes.
They reduce that. They have a plea deal with him, and they reduce it drastically to a lower level felony, which would have gave him roughly 5 to 6 years. He had served 2 already by the time the deal was done. So he would have walked out of prison in roughly 3 years. It was they were dropping it to a reckless homicide charge. So I just want to get your thoughts on this case, because what happened next was the judge threw out that plea deal. And that's why I wanted to highlight this case. The judge said that is just insufficient. He had a hearing. The mother of the victim spoke. He was moved by the mother of the victim. She said, I can't deal with this. This is not right. My daughter died. We know he killed him. Can't do a deal like this. The judge agreed, threw out the plea deal. They're set to go to trial in November.
I was very surprised that the judge got involved, because we see this all the time, where you have a crime. Sometimes it's the crimes involving co-conspirators, right? And you have one of them, who's arrested and one who's talking. And they get in bed with the one who's talking, and that person gets such an amazing deal. And sometimes we feel like it's not fair at all, because sometimes it's the person who actually committed the murder. And based on their cooperation, they get a sweet deal. It's not the same thing, but sometimes, when a judge with a lot of discretion in his courtroom chooses to exercise this and gets involved in a negotiation between defense and prosecution, it must really be bad. The facts of the case, the way the person was murdered, for the judge to just sit back and see the prosecutor and the defense attorney come to a deal, which would basically free this man up in 3 years, and a life was lost. The person suffered. There was an order of protection naming him as an aggressor against the victim, and he happens to show up in a secluded area next to the woman to say, I just got here and saw her shot in the neck, when he allegedly was going around throwing threats at her and telling people, this is what's going to happen and that's what's going to happen. This is sort of like a smoking gun, his own mouth. And then now he's free for almost 2-3 years, and you want to give him a deal? There had to be something seriously wrong with the prosecutorial case, where they really felt like if they brought it to the jurors, that they would be far from proving his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and he probably would be acquitted. So you sort of have to balance, what you got in your hands, how you could fix the investigation. It's an old case. Maybe something was botched and they've thought that he would just walk out. Better to get 3 years, plead to a felony, have that on your record, and walk out a felon, than to just walk out with a not guilty. That's probably what happened.
So we say it's not yet a criminal investigation. However, I do understand they are investigating. So I don't know, I'm not a criminal defense attorney. At what point does it become we're investigating to now it's a criminal investigation? Is that to me, that's going to be a fine line to determine mayhaps. And so that's why I think it's an ethical violation. It's not, okay, I can comment and say my kids have not been involved and they're innocent because it's not a criminal investigation. Well, if it becomes a criminal investigation, she still said that, commenting on their guilt or innocence, specifically their innocence. I think ethically, she had an obligation. Unfortunately, as a mother, I do the same thing. I get it. As a judge, I think ethically she had an obligation not to make any statements.
The charges they're facing just don't seem to be enough. 16 counts, so that's for one for each child, of second-degree felony child endangerment. That's what they're being charged with. What do you make of those charges, Judge? You almost feel like there should be something worse under these types of circumstances. But I also have to say this, and I agree with you that they knew what they were doing. This is a choice that they made. This isn't about poverty. There has to be some kind of mental health thing going on here, don't you think?
I think there's got to be. I think there is more, whether it's drug use, whether it's mental health. And I don't know that they've done drugs. I don't know their mental health, but there's always more to the story. It's unusual that it is simply evil people. It's also underlying issues. But again, the fact that they moved to avoid detection, they were still able to see through whatever those other issues were to know it was wrong and to try to avoid getting caught. So that stands out to me. But Michael, the other thing I want to say about it is when you have individuals like this living off the grid and hiding their kids, and one of them's on the brink of death, I almost wish we would see like an attempted murder charge. So it's intentional in my mind. And most of the times, parents or caretakers caught in these circumstances are charged with felony child endangerment. But do you know, in some states, child endangerment sentences and the sentencing guidelines are actually less years than certain crimes against animals. You heard me right. You
What?
heard me right.
I thought you were
So,
going to go in the opposite direction and say there's more years than, let's say, a real serious guy,
and
like
and
manslaughter
there,
or something.
right, and there may be in some states. That's the problem.
Hmm.
I can't tell you every state, but I'm saying that I have seen child offenders get less time in a specific county than those who do horrific things to animals. Now, I think both should be treated equally in my book. I like animals as much as I like
Hmm.
kids, but I'm just saying to you, I think that that's probably the best charge in this state. And I hope it's a big sentence and there's 16 counts. But don't you just think theoretically, creatively, couldn't it be attempted murder if it was intentional and he almost died?
I think you got enough for that. I think you got enough for that, especially when you find, like you said, one of the children on the brink of death, starvation, and you know mentally they deliberately were trying to hide their situation from others. So I think you absolutely have an opportunity for that under these circumstances.